Welcome to the Birth Boot Camp podcast, your trusted guide on your journey through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. I'm Holly, your host, along with Cheryl, Megan, and Liana that make up the Birth Boot Camp headquarters team. Together we are here to explore the amazing world of childbirth and family wellness. Each week we'll dive into empowering conversations with expert guests and share practical insights and heartfelt stories to support you on your unique path to parenthood. Whether you're expecting your first baby, you're a seasoned doula or childbirth educator, or simply curious about the miracle of birth, you're in the right place. Together, we'll celebrate the beauty of birth, honor the strength of motherhood, and embrace the joy of new beginnings. So sit back, relax, and join us on the Birth Boot Camp podcast, where every birth is amazing, every family is supported, and every story matters. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. I'm Holly Hopley, the CEO.
I'm Cheryl Ameling, the certification coordinator.
I'm Liana Wolf, the administrator.
And I'm Megan Busk, the head of marketing.
And today's going to be a fun one because we are continuing with our 5 myths, that you hear on social media and TikTok, but these ones are more focused around postpartum and breastfeeding. But if you didn't listen to last week's episode about our first 5 myths, go check that out. But let's kind of jump into these because I think these are ones that we, again, could all talk about all day long. So the first one is that you need to pump. If you're breastfeeding, you need to pump, and you need to have this big stash of stored milk in the freezer. And I think that is a big thing that we see all the time is these moms get stressed because they don't have this big, huge freezer stash. And you really don't have to have a ton. I mean, sometimes it's helpful to, have a little bit in there, if that helps you feel more comfortable having some stored milk, but you don't have to have it. What are your experiences with that?
Well, I remember, so before getting into birth work, I was a preschool director and we had infant care. And I remember first learning from one of the moms there because she would come in the morning and she never brought frozen milk. She had pre-made bottles that were like 4.5 to 5 ounces and they were just refrigerated. So I was like, oh, this is like fresh milk. And she was like, yeah, well, all you really need is to pump the day before. And everything you pump that day is what your baby will drink for the next day. And if you have a good supply, like a good rhythm for your pumping, then that's all you need. And that was before I was a parent. So I was just kind of like, oh, okay. Then I become a parent and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, most people now, like you said, Holly, it does still feel good to have a little bit extra in the freezer just in case. Sometimes we're dehydrated and maybe we just don't pump as much because we have our different hormonal cycles that affect our supply. But for the most part, most people only need to pump the day before what their baby is going to need for the next day.
Yep.
Yeah. If you're going to work, if there's a reason to be doing that. I never pumped. I had a little hand pump that you you do the little if you're listening to this, that you know what I'm saying. It was like an out and in, not like a squeeze. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've seen one of those. I know what you're talking about.
That's what I had. My midwife gave it to me and she was like, here, because otherwise I didn't even know that these things were things that people think about or things that, you quote unquote should think about. I didn't know. I knew that my breasts were attached to me and that's kind of where I thought my baby would be. And I was always lucky enough that I worked a job that I could take my babies with me. So I never had to pump. And I think that, which I get is super lucky, super privileged of me. That's not a common story. But I think people my students are always surprised to hear that you don't have to pump. If your babies are going to be staying with you, if you can take them with you wherever you go generally, then maybe you pump for a date night or, something like that. But otherwise, you don't have to pump, and you certainly don't have to have gallons and gallons and gallons of frozen milk in your outside freezer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's hard because we see like on TikTok, it's a thing for these moms to be like dumping out all of these ounces, like tons and tons of ounces of breast milk into these bottles and into these like gallon-sized pitchers, and they're like, look how much I pump. And I'm like, it's
not
most
normal.
people are not making that much. And so then we think that that's normal, that that's what we should be doing too, and building up this big stash when you don't have to. I mean, if that's something you really want to do, I mean, that's totally fine.
Right.
Like if that helps you feel better, or some moms have an oversupply and they pump and they donate it. Like there's so many reasons that women choose to pump, but you just don't have to have it, and don't stress over having a full freezer stash. So
Right.
yeah, I was the type that, because I've had breast reduction surgery, that does affect my supply. So I am somebody who has to like be constantly making sure my supply is doing fine, and I have to pump. But I still never had a huge stash. I actually still have some in my freezer because I want to have jewelry made with it.
Me too.
My youngest is 5. So it's just sitting in the back of my freezer, and I just haven't done anything with it. But yeah.
I totally do. Yeah, I am one of the ones with oversupply, chronic oversupply. And the advice I got with my firstborn was horrible. Like, I just thought I just had to pump. Like, well, you have the milk, you need to pump it out. That was basically the information I was given. And so I had a ton of milk, and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? I was able to take my baby to work with me. Like, and so I ended up donating it. That's when I first learned about peer-to-peer milk donation. But I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And then with my second, we had a midwife, and she kind of set me straight. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I decided to pump anyway because I liked donating. But oversupply, if you are going to be pumping and you have that oversupply, you have to be so cautious, because the risk of clogged ducts and mastitis goes up so high if you don't feed on it. So yeah, if you don't have to, don't put yourself into that kind of situation.
Yeah.
So what advice did your midwife give you that was different than the advice with your first baby?
It was exactly what we've been talking about. It was, I guess we didn't talk about it, but it was you don't need a stash, because at that point I was staying home. And she was like, no, if you pump, you're going to increase your supply. So while you naturally have that oversupply, pumping it is just going to keep increasing it. But if you just pump to comfort, is what she had me do, is I would pump to comfort on the opposite side that baby nursed. And that was what I did for the first few weeks, until I got connected with somebody who had a baby just 2 weeks younger than my baby, and they desperately needed donor milk. And I was like, okay, this is what we're doing. And so then I pumped more, and guess what? My supply cranked up like crazy. But yeah, she was like, don't pump or you're going to get too much milk.
Yeah. I wish more people understood just like the mechanics, like the whole supply and demand, and things like that. Cause I don't think that they see all the pumping and they feel like they have to do that. And I think it's also easier too, because now you can get pumps with your insurance. And so most new moms aren't paying for a pump. So they're like, yeah, sure, I'll get one and I'll do that. But they don't understand that like you can actually cause more problems by pumping. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Those social media videos of women putting their milk in these big, huge jugs. Yeah, that it doesn't help.
Yeah. Yep. I think, okay, this one's further down the list, but I think this fits right here too, is like, if you're not pumping enough, like because people see all these videos of these like full like 8-ounce bottles, and so they think I'm supposed to pump like 4 ounces on each side, and that's not the case. Like usually breastfed babies, they are only taking like max like 4 ounces in a feeding when they're, and that's when they're older. Like when they're really little, they're just taking a few ounces at a time. And so it's totally normal for some women to only pump like 2 to 4 ounces for an entire feeding, and that's both sides combined.
Yeah. I was never a good pumper, so like I mean, even when I had a real pump that wasn't just the little in out and in out and in out, like felt like a cow. I was never a good pumper. So if I had tried to gauge how much my baby was getting by how much I could pump, I would think that my baby was getting drops, like literal drops. And instead of knowing that, like ways to make sure that your baby's getting enough is, are they peeing and pooping enough? Are they growing? Are they generally happy? You know, are they like milk drunk after a feed? You know, those are like actual ways to know if your baby's getting enough, not, well, let me see how much I pump and see how much I get, because some women get a lot and some women get like the normal amount, like you said, Holly. And some like me, like I'm not a good pumper. So
Yeah,
I
feel the
hear
same
lots of
way.
women. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny, what I discovered. So like you, Cheryl, I had the manual pump. I didn't have an electric pump because that was before it was provided by insurance. And so all of that pumping I was doing was with a manual pump on the opposite side while my baby was nursing. But I had gotten an electric pump toward when he was, I don't know, under a year, but like much older. And I was like, oh, I'm really curious how an electric pump would differ. I got like half an ounce total on both sides with the electric pump. And so it's also whatever your body's used to. So if you know you're going to have to go back to work, it's like, no, you might want to start pumping at that, 3 to 4 week mark once you've, really established your supply. Because sometimes our bodies only like what they know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's a great point.
I did surrogacy, and during the first one, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pump for this baby because I had never responded to the electric pump before. I had never gotten anything. And so I was like, I don't know. I plan to pump, but I don't know what it's going to do. But when you're exclusively pumping, suddenly your breasts really respond to the sound of that machine and not to a baby's cry.
Yeah.
So all that to say, like, your body does get used to how you express milk. So if you know you're going to have to be pumping, get that established within reason, not right away. But yeah, we talk about that in our class about when to start pumping, and don't do it the day you get home from the hospital. That's not a good idea. But yeah, because pumping is just not a good indicator of your supply.
Yep. Right. And I think if you are planning to pump too, I would still be talking to a lactation consultant. A lot of people are like, oh, they can't help me with that. I'm like, but making sure that you have the right flange size, like they can still help with a lot of that, and teaching you how to express more, like if you're exclusively pumping and things like that, like they'll give you lots of really helpful tips for pumping. So I think that there's still a great asset for that.
Yeah. I think that's so important.
Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, no, I'm just saying that's so important because I didn't pump a lot. I'd pump when like I had to go out of town for work or whatever it happened to be. And I just always felt so uncomfortable. It was like, so I knew something was off. Like, I'm sure I had the wrong size or whatever, like, but having somebody to be like, okay, let's like figure this out. Almost just like you were breastfeeding your baby, there's certain tips and tricks and things that you can do to make it more comfortable and easier. And just like, you want to start off that process successful so that it can be something that you can continue to do and not feel stressed about it and worried about, all the little uncomfortable things that can happen throughout pumping.
Yeah. I talked to a lactation consultant one time about the drops that I can pump. And we were just talking like casually, like this wasn't like a, she wasn't helping me pump or anything, but I just said like, yeah, it's a good thing that I didn't need to exclusively pump for my baby, or, I don't think it would have worked. And she said, we would have gotten it to work for you. And so like the idea that getting the right pump and getting the right size and getting the schedule and like there are things that I could have done if I needed to exclusively pump for my baby. And she would have been very helpful in that, had that been the case, as opposed to me just by myself being like, I pump drops and, would have ended up maybe giving my baby formula when I didn't really want to, or, things like that. Like, I think there's definitely a place for a lactation consultant in this whole, scenario and, thing we're trying to do, because it's not always easy.
Yeah. Okay, our next one. Oh yeah, baby sleeping through the night. Oh, I know with my first, I was told by friends about all these things they did to get their baby sleeping through the night by the time they were 8 weeks old. And after he was a few weeks old, I was like, this is garbage. I was like, this is so dumb. I just like remember thinking this is not working. He's too young, he's too little. I didn't feel good about it. But that's a big thing, like in sleep training and all that stuff. There's so much information out there about, how you need to get your baby sleeping. I'm just like, oh. I remember one time, I think it was when I had Raylan, my second, that I was listening to, I don't know if it was a podcast or YouTube or whatever it was, but there was somebody who was interviewing somebody about sleep, and it was like, it is physiologically normal for infants to wake up. And that actually helps prevent SIDS because they're waking up. I was like, oh, that makes more sense to me. And then after that, like, it was so much easier as a parent with all of my babies that I was like, it is totally okay for them to wake up in the middle of the night.
Well, I did a lot of babysitting growing up, and I would put the baby to bed. Mom and dad would get home. I would leave, and my assumption was that the baby just slept. Like, I put the baby to bed. I mean, what else are they going to do, right? And so, like, it was like shocking to me when my baby just kept waking up and waking up and waking up. And I think that, like, there were things that my midwife helped us, because mom has to sleep. You have to figure out what is going to work for you to get sleep. But I just assumed that baby slept. You put them down at 7 and they wake up at 7. Like, that's like literally what I thought. So, so I was surprised that wasn't the case. I was also surprised that he didn't sleep in his crib. We made like this really cute nursery. We had like all the little decorations and everything. He didn't sleep in it, gathered laundry. And so, but when I learned that like sleeping through the night for an infant is 5 hours, it like changed the way that I thought. I was like, oh, well, we actually weren't doing as bad as I thought. It just wasn't the 7 to 7 that I had. I don't even know where I got that. So,
well, I think babysitting, I think that's a great, like, I did the same thing, and I was, you just put them to sleep and they sleep.
They slept until their mom got there. I assume
right?
They just kept doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of people who comment about that one, like babies sleeping through the night. And I always say, my 3-year-old's not still sleeping through the night. It's like takes kids a little while to get to that point. And it's, your kids might be faster than my kids, and that's fine. But like Holly was saying, like, it is normal for babies to be waking up, and it's just part of development and growing, and it can change throughout. Every few months that process can change because their brains are growing and developing, and part of that is, not making them scream all night just so they'll sleep. So, because their brains are affected by that. And I think that's something that is becoming more of a common thing that people want to do, but it's not great for our babies' little brains.
Yeah.
I
remember
think it's interesting.
we all have things to say about this.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Liana.
Go ahead.
I remember reading somewhere that even adults don't sleep through the night.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
All wake up, even if we don't like get into full consciousness, we all wake up, we all get out of that deep sleep. And so why would we expect babies to be any different?
Yeah.
Love it. Preach.
I really liked when somebody introduced this idea to me of like nighttime parenting. Like, just because it's 7 or 8 o'clock at night doesn't mean that like our parenting responsibilities stop for the next 12 hours so that we can get all the sleep we need. Like, we still have to parent our children throughout the night. Like, who doesn't have, like, my 14-year-old every once in a while still gets up in the middle of the night, you know, like just your parenting doesn't stop. And I think we expect way too much out of their little bodies and their little brains. Like you said, Megan, like they're still developing. And I think that like their sleep is constantly changing. I remember thinking back to, especially my second, like anytime she would go kind of through like a big milestone or anything, her sleep would get totally out of whack. And that's kind of something that I think a lot of people have seen. And so it's like, you think, oh, wow, they're starting to sleep a little bit better. And I'm like, just give it a week and something's going to happen. And it's all going to change again.
Give it a week.
So I'm like, enjoy it while you have it, but something's going to happen and their brains are going to change. And then all of a sudden their sleep's going to be thrown off again. Yeah. So one thing go ahead.
So I just had that exact conversation with a client who her baby's 2 months old now. And she's like, you know, checking in. She's a friend too. So I was like, how are you doing? And she's like, well, the witching hour is getting better, but the sleep is getting worse. And I'm like, well, that's kind of how it goes. And it tends to get worse and get better and get worse and get better. And when they are waking more, it's usually a sign that there's a lot going on with their brain development, which is directly linked to their body development. Like
they're about to do something really cool. That's what I use. Like I
love that. There's something really cool happening. I gotta be awake for this. And so reminding her that like it's a rough patch, but I promise in a week or two it's gonna change. You're gonna be adapting again. And we just got to roll with it and do our best. And if sleep is a real struggle right now, you need to tap that wonderful husband of yours, be like, hey, I need your help.
Yeah. I think with sleep, a lot of it is just knowing like, it's okay if they wake up, it's actually normal. It's actually okay for them. I really hate hearing like when moms say, well, my pediatrician said, you know, once they're 4 months old, they don't need to be eating at night.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, like that, when I hear that, because that is still very common. I hear that all the time. And I'm like,
it's still so tiny. That's still a little
tiny baby. I'm like, they've been alive on this earth for 4 months. Like,
you can't master anything in 4 months. You're like barely alive. like
right?
How am I supposed to like not eat during the night or not wake up? Like,
right.
Still so fresh to do. I mean, think about like if you move to a new city, like a new country, and they expect you to like be acclimated in 4 months. Like you're still figuring out how to get to the grocery store. Like,
right.
But we expect.
Well, we talk about the fourth trimester. Like you're so right, Cheryl. Like if we look at the fourth trimester, and that's the first 3 months of life, in terms of development, because the whole point of talking about the fourth trimester is like humans should actually be born a full trimester later, but our bodies couldn't handle it, right? And so like in terms of an infant's ability to survive on its own, it's like the weakest creature on the planet. or something. I don't remember where I heard that, but it makes sense. Like they can't do anything. And so when you think about that fourth trimester, they're only a month old. They're only a month old at 4 months.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of what I think of. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I mean, and I know it's hard, and we have this expectation of like, we're just going to be able to lay our baby down, you know, in whatever, you know, if you've got a bassinet or whatever. But you have to remember too, like to go along with that fourth trimester, like they have been held for 9 months. Like they have been in your body, they have been snug, they've been warm, they've never been hungry, they've never been cold. Like, and then we expect them to just come out and just all of a sudden be totally fine sleeping by themselves in a different space where they're not close to your heartbeat and all the sounds that they heard inside. And so that, I mean, that can be hard. It's an adjustment. There's been a lot, I feel like, being shared like on social media about like the importance of like contact naps. Like it's okay if your babies take naps on you. They actually love that. They will sleep better. So it's just trying to figure out all of that. And I think giving yourself some grace of like, I am figuring out how to parent this newborn. So there you go. Yeah. I would love to talk to some more like sleep experts. We need to get Dr. James McKenna on here one day to talk about infant sleep. So okay, that leads right into our next one too, is that you babies, you shouldn't let your baby fall asleep at the breast while they're nursing.
But why?
But why? I always did. So I obviously was not following the rule.
That's always my question when somebody says that. I'm like, give me the science. Tell me why they shouldn't fall asleep. Because from what I understand, the only reason it would be not okay is if they're underweight and they need to be woken up.
They're not nursing well.
But that should be something that is with your pediatrician, with your IBCLC, like that should be a part of that process. But otherwise, I nursed all my babies to sleep because that is the most peaceful part of my day.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that rocking chair with a baby and just zoned out.
Well, and I think the hormones that are involved in breastfeeding, like it helps them to fall asleep. Same thing with like mom, you get that feeling too. Like so many moms towards the end of their feeding they're kind of dozing off because it's like, I think it's nature's way of helping us to get a little bit more rest when we are already exhausted.
I think it comes back to the idea that your babies should be sleeping through the night and trying to train them that they don't need the breast to be able to sleep. And that's where the whole idea comes from. Like, don't put your baby to sleep after you or like as you're breastfeeding, because then they're just going to get used to that. And that's all they're going to want. And it just,
why is that bad?
Right? Why is that bad? I did it with all my babies. I nursed them all, and you know, till they fell asleep, until they were like 2. And it's like the best.
It's the easiest, fastest way to get them to sleep.
Yes.
The least stressful. Like,
yeah. My youngest, my daughter, by the time she was about a year, she would not fall asleep at the breast anymore. And I was like, why? I had to do a rocking dance while you're standing. Like, couldn't just rock the chair. Nope. She'd nurse and then she's like, all right, mom, where's the ride?
Oh my gosh, how funny.
That's funny.
And I was like, why can't you nurse to sleep like your brothers did? No,
that's funny.
That is so
a little
funny.
ornery from the start.
I nursed mine, each one a little bit longer than the one before, and it was the ease of it, and a lot of it had to do with sleep. Was getting it just, you know, there's a learning curve. There's a hump that you have to get over in the beginning, but like once you find your stride, like it becomes fairly simple. And so like getting them to sleep, making them happy, getting over, you know, like you can't have that toy, or you know, like what
I was gonna say
you
any
fell
little
and
owie, like it
yeah,
just
little
is
owies,
the
yeah.
fastest way to solve any problem in their world.
Right,
Yep.
right. But a lot of it had to do with was nighttime and naps, and like it was easier, especially when I had lots of other little kids running around. It was easier to just nurse the baby to sleep. It was a guaranteed this will get them to sleep. And it was also like I loved removing myself from the situation and be like, I have to go nurse the baby now. And I'm actually about to like lose my mind. And it's like a good excuse to be like, okay, I have to go nurse the baby. Because it was relaxing for me too. So yeah, I don't know how something that is biologically normal can be bad or be a bad habit or be something that like is frowned upon. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you
things that way
guys
for a reason.
did you guys find that your babies would nap longer? My babies are power nappers. So I don't know if it's just because their bellies were full and they were content and they could sleep longer, but like 3-hour naps we're talking,
Oh wow, no, not mine.
Yeah.
Not mine.
I think you got
Yours.
lucky there.
Oh, yeah, I must have gotten lucky there.
I think it
You
depends.
were
I think
lucky,
naps
Megan.
depends on the kids. I feel like some of my kids were better nappers, but then like my youngest was horrible.
Oh, really?
So
Mm.
yeah.
My babies tended to know if I was diving into a project.
Of course.
If I was like, this will probably be a long nap, so I could probably start this thing. It's going to be a 20-minute nap. If I just stand around thinking, oh, I better not jump into anything because it's going to be a 20-minute nap. It's a 3-hour nap. So
Right.
I think mine had like an intuition of like, what is mom going to spend this next time doing?
Absolutely.
And then decide how long they were going to nap.
Yeah. Or if you were planning to nap at the same time, the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. Now, my babies were every 2-hour nursers until they night weaned.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And we had to make that happen after a year. That I was like, no, mama's done. We need to night wean. It's time. Like, I am happy to nurse you during the day, but we need to get the night figured out because it's a little excessive, kids, to be still waking up 2 hours to nurse at 15 months old. Like, it's time.
Yeah. I think everybody kind of figures that out on their own, and each baby is different too. But I do think, like, I love that. Like, I did the same thing. It was like 18 months. Like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And so like taking your own feelings into account also, I think is important when we're not talking about weaning, but we're going to, in thinking about weaning is you matter in the scenario also.
Yeah. Okay. Our last one is just when somebody asks you if you have a good baby. There's this idea that there's a good baby and a bad baby, and that's just simply absolutely false. There's no such thing. What do you guys think, like, when somebody says, do you have is your baby a good baby, like, what does that even mean?
I think to them it automatically jumps to like, are they sleeping through the night?
Yeah. Do they cry?
Do they cry?
Right.
Do they
Are they on like a consistent feeding schedule? Like they feed at very regular intervals,
I saw a meme one time that said like, yeah, I have a good baby. They're not in jail and don't do drugs and are kind to other people. Like, yeah, I have a good baby. So it was something like that. It just made me laugh because the idea is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
And
I don't think anybody would be like, yeah, I have a horrible baby.
Right?
Like, nobody's gonna say that.
I think though, when we set up like the idea that there is a good baby and there is a bad baby and there are rules for good babies, then I think some parents can think that they do have a bad baby. My baby doesn't sleep through the night. My baby cries. My baby is colicky. My baby, I don't know, doesn't sleep in a crib, like wants to be on me all the time. Like we set these, falls asleep at the breast. Like we have these rules, quote unquote, that indicate if a baby is good or bad. And so like that's the unfair part about this conversation, is that all of those things are normal for babies to do. It doesn't mean they're bad. It means congratulations, you have a normal baby.
Yeah.
So I mean, because I have heard moms say, oh yeah, he was a horrible baby, and it just meant he wasn't always content all the time. Neither am I.
Yeah.
Does that make me a horrible mom, horrible person? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, and I always tell like parents too, I'm like, babies are allowed to have bad days. Like if they're not feeling good, and it's hard because they can't tell us that. They can't say, hey, I have a headache, or hey, I whatever. Like they can have bad days too, just like we can, like you were saying, like they have emotions, and their main way of communicating those with you is crying. Like but we equate crying with like bad. That's just how they communicate.
Instead of trying to get their, I'm
Right.
just trying to get my needs met.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people say, oh, well, they're going to manipulate you. Babies are going to manipulate you. And I'm like, nope. Yeah.
They do
I mean,
not
if they
have
could
the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
Right. If they could wake up in the morning and be like, Mother, I'm quite hungry and I would love a diaper change, then they would, but they can't, so they cry.
Yeah.
Stewie from Family Guy.
Right, exactly.
No,
100%.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but the good baby thing, I mostly hear that from older generations though.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Like I don't think I've ever heard that from somebody that's my age. They'll ask like, are they a good sleeper? And I'm like, that's a fair question, because my second was a crummy sleeper. Like he was a screamer and it was just no good. Which, we later figured out was dietary, but that didn't mean he was a bad baby.
Right.
His sleep just stunk. And so, but yeah, I mostly hear it from like grandmothers, so older women who are like, oh, are you being such a good baby for your mom? And I'm like, why are you saying that? That's so weird.
That's funny.
I still think it's important though to know what's normal, because if somebody asks you, is your baby a good sleeper? And if you think, oh, my baby only sleeps 4 or 5 hours a night instead of that 12-hour stretch that I think they could or should, like there's still, like you could still think that your baby's a bad sleeper when they're just a normal baby sleeper. So like there's still,
we just put all these expectations. And most of them are unrealistic. And so then we do feel like we have, oh, my baby's not doing this, or my baby's not doing this, or, yeah.
No, that's a really good point. Because like I said, all of my babies were every 2 hour, like they would wake all the time, but we only call my middle one, we only say that he was a bad sleeper because he was screaming. But of course, when we found out that was because of dietary stuff, like, oh, he wasn't a bad sleeper. He just felt horrible.
Yeah.
But it is just easier to say he's a bad sleeper. That's a really good point. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. That's why we have these conversations, to point out the things.
Isn't it interesting looking back? Like I can look back and see things like after like talking about them, I'm like, oh, I remember that. Like it wasn't my fault. Like it wasn't anything that I was doing wrong, So it's just, and every baby and every kid is different, and they all have different temperaments and personalities, and yeah.
When I teach classes, when we talk about class 10 and learning your baby, I always remind my students they already have a personality. It's already embedded in them, and so they're going to be learning how to express that personality. So while you're still trying to figure out what the personality is, you are simultaneously having to learn how to parent and nurture that personality at the same time. And most of them are like, I'm sorry, what? They have a personality? Yes, I know it doesn't seem like it because newborns don't do much, but they do. They have their genetics all in place.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's like one of my
love that.
favorite things is to like watch them as they get older, you know, and as they're starting to like express themselves and things like that. So,
Mhm.
I know, it's so cute.
yep.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Well, it's funny though, like as they're like in class as they're pregnant, they talk about their baby's personality. They just don't realize that they do. They're talking
Mhm.
about they kick at night or they move a lot or this baby doesn't stop moving and he likes the sound of his dad's voice. Like they talk about their baby's personality. They just don't realize that's what it is.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's a
Oh, I
good
love
point.
that.
Yep. Love it. All right. Well, this was fun. I think these are all things we can do full episodes on just each individual thing. But I think we just have to be careful about like what content like we're taking in, you know, especially as either expecting parents or new parents, and knowing that your baby's probably doing something that's very normal. So I
Yeah.
always love that phrase, Cheryl. I don't remember where you got it from, but that congratulations, you have a normal baby. So
The milk mag on
yeah.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
I know, I love that. Congratulations, you have a normal baby.
yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks for listening, and everybody. Feel free to leave us any comments or review. And I'm sure we'll probably do another one of these sometime in the future. These are fun to talk about. So stay tuned, and we will talk to you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Birth Boot Camp podcast. We're so grateful to have you as a part of our community. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more families on their journey through pregnancy and birth. As a token of our appreciation, we're excited to offer you our exclusive birth plan blueprint. Inside, you'll find expert guidance and a template to help you create a birth plan that reflects your preferences and desires for your birthing experience. Simply click the link below in the episode description to have your blueprint sent right to your inbox. Remember, your birth plan is a powerful tool for communication and advocacy during labor and delivery. Don't miss this opportunity to take control of your birthing experience and advocate for the birth you envision. Thank you again for listening. Be sure to subscribe, and we look forward to sharing more amazing insights and stories with you in our next episode.